On the 14th of February 2007, Valentine's Day, Art and Lois Serrin had just finished their date night and decided to go over to their daughter's house, Jodine Serrin, to check up on her, as they had not heard from her all day. As they got to Jodine's condo, they saw that the lights were on inside, but when no one answered the door, Art and Lois immediately started to panic. Using their spare key, they tried to enter the condo, but the door was on the latch, so Art smashed his way in. Once inside the property, they made their way towards Jodine's bedroom, hoping she was there. As they walked inside the room, they saw Jodine naked on her bed, with a man on top of her, having sex. Embarrassed that they had just walked in on their daughter having an intimate moment with this man, Art and Lois quickly left the room, telling Jodine and the man to get dressed and to come out and talk to them. As the minutes went past and Art and Lois waited, no one came out to greet them, so Art went back into his daughter's room, but the man was gone. His daughter, however, was still there, lying on the bed, and when he touched her, Jodine was ice cold. She had been dead for over 10 hours, and Art had just walked in on this monster doing unspeakable things to his daughter's body.
It happened inside this condo where Jodi used to live. Now, investigators have DNA evidence, but the problem is they haven't been able to match it to anyone.
Who had killed Jodine Serrin, and would this monster ever be caught? Jodine Elizabeth Serrin was born on the 21st of November 1967 in Glendale in California to her parents Arthur and Lois Serrin. Jodine was one of 6 children, and her siblings were called Michael, Nancy, Barbara, Carol and Chuck, and Jodine herself was known as Jody to her friends and family. Jodine loved her family dearly, and she was particularly close with her sisters. She grew up in Walton Hills in Ohio, and she later graduated from Bedford High School in 1986. Her parents, Art and Lois, then decided to move the family back to California, and they settled in Carlsbad. Jodine was described as friendly, sweet, shy, trusting, and quiet within her community. She enjoyed ice skating, biking, crafts, kayaking, and she loved horseback riding and often competed in county fairs. Jodine absolutely loved animals, especially her white horse, called Sam, and she adored her cat, called Angel. Jodine was also very creative. She enjoyed writing poetry, and she was also a very talented flower arranger, and once her family moved to Carlsbad, Jodine earned a certificate in floral design. Jodine was a vulnerable woman who suffered from mental disabilities, with some reports stating schizophrenia and learning difficulties. Despite this, however, Jodine was highly functioning, self-sufficient, and was able to live independently and lead her own active life, including a very busy social life. She kept busy helping others, especially homebound senior citizens, and she enjoyed volunteering at her church and the Humane Society. She was active in the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and she was an enthusiastic walkathon fundraiser. For the past 10 years, 39-year-old Jodine had been living independently in her condo on the 1900 block of Swallow Lane, and she took great pride in her home. While Jodine could live by herself, she did depend on her parents for certain things, such as driving her to and from appointments, as she could not drive herself, and her parents luckily lived nearby. Jodine was very close to her parents and always picked up the phone whenever they called, and she kept in close contact with them. Life was going well, that was, until a tragic turn of events happened on Valentine's Day in 2007. On the 14th of February 2007, Jodine's parents were out, having dinner and going to the theatre together, celebrating Valentine's Day. On the way home, they decided to stop at Jodine's house to check up on her and to say hi. Jodine's mother, Lois, said she had a strange feeling that night that she couldn't quite shake, as they had not heard much from Jodine that day, so they went over to check if everything was okay. They arrived at their daughter's condo at about 10 p.m, but when they knocked, Jodine didn't answer the door. Her parents could see that the lights were on inside, so they knocked again, and again there was no answer. Art and Lois then let themselves in with a spare key, but the door remained on the latch. Starting to panic a bit, as this was slightly out of the ordinary, Art forced the door open and smashed his way in, breaking the lock in the process. On entering the condo, things seemed normal. The lights were on, and nothing was out of place or ransacked, but they still couldn't see Jodine. Lois said, "The lights were on, everything seemed normal. We were thinking she was in bed or in the shower." So they headed towards Jodine's bedroom and pushed open the door. Inside the bedroom, they saw Jodine naked with a man on top of her, seemingly having sex. Assuming they were interrupting, they rushed out of her bedroom and told the pair to get dressed, and they waited in another part of the condo. But as the minutes went by and nobody came out, Art went back into the bedroom and saw that the man had left. Jodine was still there, however, lifeless on the bed and cold to the touch. They immediately called 911 and were told to move Jodine onto the floor and to begin CPR. But it was too late. Jodine had been bludgeoned and strangled to death, and she had been dead for hours. But where was this mysterious man, and what had her parents just walked in on him doing to their poor, vulnerable daughter? The police immediately rushed to the crime scene and cornered off the area, trying to figure out what had happened and who had murdered Jodine. At first glance, nothing was missing from the house, and no doors or windows had been broken or forced open, implying that this had not been a robbery gone wrong. They believed that Jodine had willingly opened the door to someone she knew. It was known that Jodine would always make her guests remove their shoes and to leave them at the door, and the murderer had in fact left his shoes behind in the hurry of leaving the scene. There was also signs that a meal had been shared and that they had potentially spent some time together in the living room before the gruesome murder took place. Jodine's bedroom, however, was in disarray, and it was clear that something violent had taken place there. There was a large amount of blood throughout the room and the bathroom. The walls were splattered with blood, and there was blood all over the bed linens. The bedroom windows had been covered with the linens in a presumed attempt to maintain privacy so that no one would be able to see what was going on inside the room. Disturbingly, a full-length mirror had been placed facing the bed, presumably so the man could see exactly what he was doing. Bloody footprints were also found at the scene, indicating that the murderer had walked around and spent some time there. It was clear to investigators that the murderer had spent a lot of time setting up the scene to be exactly how he wanted it. The whole murder seemed very methodical and calculating. As for the exit point, after Art and Lois left the bedroom, they went to a section of the condo where they were unable to see the bedroom door or the front door, so the killer was able to sneak out unseen. Art told the police that as it was dark and his view was obscured, that he hadn't properly seen the man, but he did manage to briefly give a description of the suspect, saying that he was a white, heavy-set man with a large stomach and dishevelled brown hair. He presumed the man was in his 30s, and he estimated that he was around 5'8" to 6 foot tall. A post-mortem examination was conducted, and it was clear that there had been a horrific struggle, and Jodine was covered in defensive wounds. She had died from blunt force wounds to the head, and it seemed as if she had been cut post-mortem, including an incision at her neck. Finally, they predicted her death had occurred around noon on the 14th of February 2007. This meant that when her parents found her at 10 p.m. that evening, she had been dead for at least 10 hours, and the man they had seen on top of her was the killer, and what was taking place was not consensual sex, it was necrophilia. Following the disturbing scene, police jumped straight into action and tried hard to catch Jodine's killer. Unknown male DNA was taken from Jodine's body and from around the crime scene, but when it was ran through the state's database, it turned up with no matches. Carlsbad Police Lieutenant Kelly Kane said, We've got some DNA profiles, but no match. It's evidence sufficient to identify someone if we get a match. A neighbour of Jodine, Samantha Raymond, told police that she saw a man running down an embankment near her apartment on the night that Jodine was murdered. She said that due to the speed he was running at, she couldn't get a clear picture of his face. Art had told the police that he may have recognized the man from Jodine's close circle of friends, as he thought he vaguely recognized him. This man was called Robert Burns, and he often attended similar events to Jodine. They tracked down Burns and questioned him, but he was quickly ruled out as a suspect, as they found footage of Burns on a bus at the same time the murder was occurring that night. Burns also provided a DNA sample, which did not match the sample found at the crime scene, so police had to look elsewhere. With Art's description of the killer, they created a composite photograph of the assailant and they released it to the public. Art told the news, "Somebody somewhere knows something, and eventually it's going to come out." Jodine's mother Lois said, "We need to know this evil person is caught and never will be able to commit another horrendous crime." Months passed and hundreds of leads were received, but they went nowhere. Police continued to test the public's DNA, hoping to get a match, but again, this was unsuccessful.
It happened inside this condo where Jodi used to live. Now, investigators have DNA evidence, but the problem is they haven't been able to match it to anyone.
There was even a $52,000 reward on information that led to the arrest of this man. Months then turned to years, and Jodine's parents never gave up hope.
The killer left behind DNA evidence, but investigators couldn't find a match in the National Criminal Database. The case is at a standstill.
I know Art and Lois are surprised. It's a hard thing to tell them not that we don't have any more info. There's no new developments on this case.
That's why Jodi's parents are hoping someone will come forward.
By 2015, 8 years since their daughter's murder, 85-year-old Art and 80-year-old Lois had raised money, handed out flyers, and had the cold case information displayed inside buses, continuously hoping for a break in the case. Lois said that she feared that the man who killed her daughter was going to do it again. She said, "This is 8 years now, and you think somebody would know something. This monster could be dead, and we will never know." And finally, the break they had hoped for finally came 2 years later, in 2017. After getting no database hits on the killer's DNA, advancement in technology and forensic science now allowed investigators to turn to phenotyping. Phenotyping uses artificial intelligence to predict what a person's likely eye, hair, and skin color could be, as well as their face shape and ancestry, and this in turn helps create a computer image of the person. Because of this new technology, Parabon Nanolabs was able to transform genetic material found at the scene into a digital image, and on the 10th anniversary of Jodine's murder, the police released this photo. They pinpointed the killer to a man in his 30s or 40s and of a European, Caucasian descent. According to the analysis, the suspect had fair to light skin, green or blue eyes, brown or blonde hair, and some freckles. Parabon Nanolabs were then able to come up with a narrow field of potential assailants, and they gave investigators 7 to 8 names of potential murderers based upon the DNA profile. One of those names was David Mabrito, but as his last name indicated that he was from more of a Mediterranean descent rather than Caucasian European, he was put at the bottom of the priority list. Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick had developed a different methodology where she could run her software against looking for matches in the genetic genealogy YSTR databases and potentially come up with the last name of the suspect. After testing the material found at the crime scene, she came up with the possible last name of Miracle or Markel or something similar to that. After looking at a number of profiles that had those last names, sadly, none of them matched with the timeline of the crime. Around this time, another new method in forensic genealogy was being created. This method involved genealogists using open-source DNA databases to jump into family trees and to poke around for a potential match. And so, genealogist Barbara Ray Venter, the same scientist who had helped police and investigators in identifying Joseph James DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer, got involved in Jodine's case. Using the killer's DNA and the surname Miracle, Barbara uploaded the information onto an ancestry website called GEDmatch, and she got a hit. Once again, the name David Mabrito was flagged. As it turned out, several adoptions had taken place in the past in the Miracle family, and though names may change, DNA does not. But who was David Mabrito, and was he really Jodine's murderer? In November 2018, David Mabrito was finally identified as the suspect in Jodine's murder. David Mabrito, who had been 38 at the time of Jodine's murder, was a meth-addicted transient who was suspected in other crimes. With him now being identified as the murderer, police urgently needed to find him to confirm that it was indeed him, and to get a DNA sample to compare it against the sample that was found at the crime scene back in 2007. As investigators hunted down David Mabrito, however, they were hit with another block. It was discovered that David had taken his own life, overdosing on drugs in 2011, 4 years after murdering Jodine. He had been 42 years old at the time, and he left behind his ex-wife Marissa and son Dylan. Police decided to then approach Marissa and Dylan in the hopes that Dylan would aid in the case by giving his own DNA to law enforcement and conclusively prove that David Mabrito was the killer.
They came to the house and had said that they were investigating a cold case from 2007 and had wanted to talk to my son and I, and couldn't imagine why.
Horrified that David could have even been involved in this crime, Marissa and Dylan still listened to the investigators and bravely agreed to help, and Dylan handed over his DNA.
A month later, he came to us and said that I believe the DNA from my swab matched, I think it was, and they ended up pulling something with genealogy, and it ended up being my dad, so it was very heavy. And
I thought, there's no way. There was just no way. I still have a hard time wrapping my head around it.
As investigators were talking with Marissa and Dylan, Marissa spotted an image of the shoes which had been left at Jodine's house, and she recognized these at once, saying they were her ex-husband's.
I saw a photocopy picture of shoes, and I asked to see them, and as soon as I see them, my gut knew.
More information also came out regarding David Mabrito. As it turned out, David had matched the description of a suspect in another unrelated crime back in 2011, and he had been asked to give his DNA. After a police officer took a swab of David's DNA, as well as some pictures of him, David was let go, and a week later he took his own life, as the coward believed that if they had his DNA, he could now be linked to Jodine's murder. The sample, however, was strangely never logged in the DNA database, which is why he was never flagged over the years. Investigators finally managed to track down this specific sample, and they sent it off for testing. And finally, after 11 years, Jodine's case was solved. It was concluded that David Mabrito's DNA was a probable match to evidence found at the crime scene, and that the likelihood that someone other than David Mabrito was the suspect was 1 in 64 quintillion, a number with 18 zeros in it.
It hit me pretty hard at first, but then I saw what it did to my mom too, so I felt like I kind of needed to be stronger.
That was a hard day.
Lieutenant Greg Corrin said that they were sure David Mabrito was their suspect, but they weren't sure if Jodine and David knew each other, but they didn't believe so. The lieutenant said, "There's nothing to indicate it. The nature of their relationship and how they crossed paths is unfortunately gone with the people that are involved. Though we will never truly know what happened that night, and whether the murder was spur of the moment or premeditated, at least for now, we know who committed it. It was assumed that whilst David was around Jodine's house, he had used methamphetamines and then went into this sexual deviance, killing her and then carrying out these fantasies until he was finally stopped by Jodine's parents.
The cold case murder of a mentally disabled Carlsbad woman has finally been solved.
After 11 years, Jodine's murder was finally solved. Police Chief Neil Gallucci said, "We are thankful to provide a resolution of this case to Jodine's family. We never forgot Jodine, and we are grateful to have identified the person responsible for her tragic murder." Jodine's family released a statement saying, "Jodine taught us all with her special challenges, perseverance and love of nature. There was joy in her laughter, love in her heart, and faith in her soul." The Serrin family is forever grateful to the Carlsbad Police Department for their outstanding efforts in attaining justice through resolution of this tragic case.
They gave us a name, they showed us a picture, but it was just almost too much to handle at that time. It just took a while to really understand that they really found the person that did this horrific crime.
I felt anger that it took this long, but I was relieved that this was finally identified. That was a good feeling. We felt that this finally solved the case.
In my opinion, so many people showed tremendous compassion and moral courage in this case. When detectives told Art and Lois that they had finally found Jodine's murderer, Lois immediately asked how Dylan was doing, as she knew it would be unimaginably difficult to find out that your own father was a murderer. She said, "This was not an easy thing for Dylan and his mother to do." The willingness of Dylan and Marissa and the courage they showed in ultimately proving that Dylan's dad was a murderer is so incredible. In 2019, District Attorney's Office even honoured them both with a Citizens of Courage Award. Marissa said she had found it incredibly difficult in knowing that her ex-husband could be capable of such horrific things. She said that the decision to help led to a difficult few months, and she said that she had to turn off her phone as there were online attacks and people were labeling her a monster, accusing her of somehow knowing what had happened and even being involved. Marissa had also blamed herself over the years for David's death, thinking he had taken his own life because of something she had done. But she later said to find out that it had been because he thought he was about to be caught was some sort of relief.
Two things happened with this case. Jodine has peace, and we had an answer as to why he killed him. Because for almost 8 years, we blamed ourselves. I blamed myself.
I think sometimes it's easy to forget about the murderer's family. Dylan and Marissa's lives were completely changed.
I want them to feel like their daughter's free, because going on almost, 10 years that they haven't heard anything back from the police. They know nothing.
The truth will always come out, and the right thing to do is always the right thing to do.
But as always, the person we really have to remember in this case is Jodine Serrin. My heart goes out to her whole family, and I'm so glad that they finally got some sort of answer, but I'm so sorry that no justice will truly be served. And as always, rest in peace, Jodine Serrin.